hit him with something that he's not expecting. So she decided, she brought her 12-year-old daughter in and said, Mr. President, I have a 12-year-old daughter and she would like to ask you a question. Well, her name was Taylor. She says, hello, Mr. President, my name is Taylor. My mom won't let me date. Do you let your daughters date? You could almost hear the relief because he didn't get asked about the deficit again. And he immediately melted our hearts. He talked about how Taylor, your mom and dad love you very much. We love Sasha and Malia. And I know it doesn't seem fair sometimes, but someday you'll understand. He went on to give a good parental speech that any one of you probably would have given as well. Totally related to it. I mean, even if you were a far staunch right-wing Republican, you might have liked him for just one moment. So then we decided to end the interview with a question. At the time, there was this Korean dancer, singer named Psy, and he had this crazy thing called the Gangnam dance, where he do one of these numbers, and it was really crazy. I mean, it got like 10 zillion YouTube views. It was the hot culture topic of the day. So I decided to ask him, Mr. President, will you, if elected on inauguration night, will you do the Gangnam dance at the inauguration with Mrs. Obama? And he said, well, might not be the right place for it, but I'll tell you what, I might bust it out for her in the bedroom some night. Whoa! Scoop it, print it. Well, that comment and the interview about the daughters went viral. It was in every publication, USA Today, Rolling Stone, Huffington Post, and it was everywhere. The station's call letters got out there, and it was a calculated risk on our part, but we just didn't want to have the same old thing, and people thinking that we're just there shilling for the president, because we weren't. And we generally never made our political views known, and we thought, this is a great opportunity we're given. Let's do something different with it. So that was one of the highlights and one of my favorite moments. Maury Povich was a great interview. Gosh, you know, I could go on and on, but other than Keith Emerson's mom, I wish I'd had her. I'd take that one back. So, been fired 3 times in 43 years. That's not bad. The radio business is very, you know, at just a toss of a hat, they'll fire you. I've been lucky. I've worked hard. I've worked at good stations. WZID, probably the best one I ever worked for. Decided to leave on my own. But I'm really lucky because 4 times in 43 years, the F-bomb has been dropped on my show. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one time by me. And, you know, normally when you get on the air, a filter kicks in and you just don't say those things that you might say among close friends. Danny Roach is a sports reporter now on Channel 4 in Boston, WBZ. He started out as my sports reporter on WCGY in Lawrence, Boston. So he was down in Florida covering the Red Sox spring training. And he was supposed to call me at 9 o'clock. We were going to, you know, how are things going, you know, with Oil Can Boyd and Bob Stanley and Jim Rice. I mean, that was back in the 80s. And, all right, let's go to Florida. Here's Dan Roach. Here's Dan Roach. Dan, well, clearly something went wrong. So I thought I turned down the microphone, started the next song, and shouted out at the top of my lungs, because I was mad, where the F is he? And then I looked down, the microphone is on. I apologize that that happened. But anyway, guess what? Nobody called. Now, the song that I was playing was about the loudest possible song by the rock band, the metal band, Def Leppard. So they pretty much covered it up for me, so I was okay. Nobody called, nobody said anything. Another time was our last day on WCGY. It was being sold by Kurt Gowdy, and it was our last day, and we were saying goodbye to people. Now, typically on that show, we would usually just always put people on and make people wonder if it was the truth or not. So we're getting calls. People want, is this for real? So a comedian friend of mine called up and said, hey Mike, what the F is going on? And this was live. I don't know, but what's going to happen? I'm going to get fired for this? So that, nobody ever complained. Nothing ever happened with that. Third time was with Nils Lofgren, who was a guitar player for Bruce Springsteen in the E Street Band. And I didn't pre-tape that one. Should have. We were talking, one of the guys in his band, little Stevie Van Zandt, was on The Sopranos. He was a great musician, but he had a pretty big role on The Sopranos. And so we were talking about The Sopranos, and Jim Niels Lofgren says something like, yeah, and Carmela says, F Tony this, and just, whoa, hang on a second. So he dropped one, but it went by so fast. Why make a big deal out of it and pull it back? So once again, not a single call on that. I was very lucky. If you use it in a gratuitous way, that's one thing. But if something slips like that, they're probably going to give you a mulligan on that one. So, but the fact that not one person ever called those 3 times, either I had no listeners or people accepted it. Oh boy. Stunts. All right, let me talk to you about stunts. We all remember or have read about, nobody's old enough to have probably lived through the War of the Worlds, which happened in 1938 with, thank you, Orson Welles. Second senior moment of the night. I thought there'd be more by now. All right, so this is where Orson Welles, he's on the air. This is a national broadcast. And he announces that Martians have landed or crash landed into a swamp in New Jersey. And he's got field reporters. Clearly it's all choreographed, but it sounded real. Do you remember? Anybody here remember that moment? But you remember hearing about it. Well, that caused quite a scene. I mean, people were killing themselves because they were so frightened. It was one of the first times that we saw how powerful radio was. Again, this was 1938. So I did my own little spin on it, much more tame on a local level. In 2000, the tall ships were visiting the Charles Navy Yard, the Charlestown Navy Yard in Boston, where the USS Constitution is. And it was a big deal. I mean, people were going, and it was bring your kids, take pictures, but it was on the news every night, and I started getting tired of it. So the next morning, I decided that I would announce that one of the tall ships left Charlestown, drove up, sailed up around Cape Ann, through Newburyport and into the Merrimack River, and docked at the Songus Arena in Lowell. But to make it real, before I announced it, a lady called, just probably to request a song, and said, hey, you want to do me a favor? I'm about to kind of pull a gag here. You can help me out by saying you were there and you saw it. So I started talking about it, and she just jumped right in, and she was making stuff up, played it back on the air, started to get the calls. Oh, what time is the tall ships at the Songus Arena? Nobody's bothering to ask the questions. How do you get a tall ship under 18 bridges that are not very tall, and all the rocks and the rapids and the falls and everything else? Because I painted that picture. I made it real, the same way that Orson Welles did. So, one lady from Hudson drove down, was very upset, because there was no Europa. Europa was the name the lady said the boat. I mean, she played it beautifully. So she gets back, she calls the radio station, she complains, I did a bad thing, I was irresponsible, blah, blah, blah. And apparently the Nashua Telegraph got wind of the fact that happened. So they called me, they got my number, called me at home, asked, did I do that? I said, yes, but I can't make any statements for the radio station, you'll have to talk to my boss. Fine. So we hang up, I call the boss quickly, I say, you're going to get a call from the Nashua Telegraph, just play along with it, say that I'm going to be suspended, and we might get some publicity out of it. So they called him, he said, yes, Mr. Morin, the FCC would not approve of what he did, and they put a front page headline in the newspaper, tall ship's tail lands DJ in hot water. Wow, that's pretty good publicity. Yeah, the Telegraph bought it. But the thing is, I got on the air and I announced that I was being suspended for 1 day because I did a bad thing. Even though we decided we were going to do that, I really wasn't. So some people heard about that, drove up to the radio station in Nashua with a couple boxes of Salada tea bags and dumped them in the parking lot. Like the Boston Tea Party, which was great. It made national news, we got it in the paper, we got all this free publicity, nobody got hurt. Today, if I tried to do, well, let's put it this way, that was 2000. If I had tried to do that 2013 at WZID, they would not have let me. I would have had to get it approved. I would have had the lawyers have to sign off on it. And by the time that all happens, like the moment's gone. It's just, it's not going to happen because they're probably going to say no. There have been a few things, though, a few stunts, not done by me, that have gone horribly wrong. One was a couple guys that worked at WAAF, Opie and Anthony, in Worcester. It's a rock station geared to men 18 to 34. And young males are a lot more tolerant of, you know, things that are a little bit more coarse that you know, we all might not approve of. So on April Fool's Day, they announced that Mayor Tom Menino of Boston had been killed in an auto accident. Terrible thing to do, definitely crossing the line. There's nothing fun or funny about that. And of course the radio station took a lot of heat, as they should. And the management, who to this day I believe was very happy about the publicity, was pretty much forced to fire Opie and Anthony. So here's a couple guys probably making, I don't know, 60, 70 grand a year, immediately offered a job doing morning drive in New York City because of what they pulled, probably making 300 to 400 grand a year. Wow. Rewarded for irresponsibility. That happens in this business. They also, I mean, they didn't stop there. When they were in New York City, they put somebody in St. Patrick's Cathedral one night with a tape recorder and had some people simulating having sex in there. And it was just completely tasteless stuff that you're not going to find happening as much anymore. And I can tell you when the end of that started to happen. It was Super Bowl, I'm not sure which number it was, the wardrobe malfunction incident. Remember that one? Justin Timberlake ripping open Janet Jackson's top. And we saw something we weren't supposed to. And it went on live TV because somehow either it wasn't being tape delayed, which everything like that is now, or nobody, you know, whatever. So there was a huge fine, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of dollars to CBS, who carried it that year. But as soon as that happened, every radio station lawyer hammered out a memo, you know, don't do this, don't do that, don't basically have any fun because of what happened on the Super Bowl. So those things happen, and it's a very legal world these days, so we can't have quite as much fun. But then some people pretty much kind of ruined it for the rest of us. I'll give you one more stunt that I pulled, but it was a very small one. It was at WCGY, the Kirk County station in Boston, and there was another station, WZLX 100.7. They were giving away $1,000 every day. That was like, you know, in the morning, caller number 19, you win $1,000. Well, what happens a lot of times is people get confused and call other radio stations when that happens. So I got a call from a guy who said, hey, am I calling number 19? I said, yes, you are, sir. Come on down and pick up your $1,000. I know. Seemed like a good idea at the time. So, of course, the guy's going to go down to the radio station, WZLX. He's at the John Hancock Tower on Clarendon Street in downtown Boston's Back Bay, up to the 33rd floor. And they looked at him like he was an alien. I'm here to collect my money. What's your name? Not on the list. Get out of here. So, guess whose phone rings the next day? Yeah, my phone rang. And this is so-and-so. Remember me? Yeah. How'd you like your $1,000? He says, I realize what happened. I just want you to know I'm a lawyer. Believe it or not, a lawyer with a sense of humor, and he was okay. I'm not sure what he really could have gotten out of it. It would, you know, maybe a little something. But also technically, you're supposed to tell people when you're recording them, and we recorded and played it back. Although nobody does that, so it was definitely a gray area. But I was very lucky. I always like to say there's a lot of numbers in my career. Like I've done 11,000 radio shows. I've played almost 400,000 records, but I've never been sued, and thank God, because that was one time that I thought it may very well happen. All right, so before I conclude and open up the floor to questions, because you might have a few things that you want to know about. I also write for the Nashua Telegraph. I've done about 400 columns over the last 10 years. They're humor columns. I talk a lot about what's happening. Again, things that we can all relate to. And my fiancée Barbara loves to shop, and once in a while I get dragged along. Guys, can we relate to that? Yeah, all right, well, pretend that you do. All right, so here's a column I wrote called The Bed and Bath Safari. I've never gone hunting in my life. However, on one recent Saturday night, I believe I came as close to the experience as one can without having a gun, trees, or camouflage attire. I went shopping for a new duvet with Barbara at one of those stores that features nice accessories for one's home. At first I resisted going along because my duvet hunting license had expired after our last hunt at Macy's 2 years ago. She assured me that the decor police were very understanding about such things. I could tell that Babs was getting into stalking mode as we snuck past the Rachel Ray hunting knives and crawled past the dogs playing poker wall hangings. Suddenly, we came upon an open stand of silk plants that revealed a wall filled with brightly covered duvets. We would build a duck blind here and observe them from a distance before moving in for the kill. Barbara's pulse quickened as she spotted a brown, white, and blue Nautica duvet with a full complement of bedding accessories. I was ready for a nap, but she was all set to pounce. Hunting makes me sleepy. That design line has been discontinued by Nautica, the store associate told us. Well, being the trooper that she is, Barbara returned to the silk plant line to make a new plan. Before long, we spotted an accent pillow in the color scheme that she wanted. Hopefully, there would be a bedding set nearby that matched this one lone pillow. Well, the same woman returned to tell Barb that it was placed there by mistake. A rogue pillow is what she called it. A rogue pillow? When's the last time you heard those two words in the same sentence? I wasn't quite sure what to make of this associate. She was working on a display bed using a spatula to tuck in the sheets and covers. It's true. Upon closer inspection, I noted she was using a rogue spatula. Just to get things moving, I suggested we get the Hello Kitty duvet and go home. Well, she ignored that idea and began stalking silk pillowcases. I admitted I wasn't a fan of silk bedding, and she explained that when you sleep on silk pillowcases, you don't get bedhead. You're good to go the next morning without having to plug in a curling iron or spritz some spray into your head. Just as we were about to break camp for the night, a duvet in 3 earth tone colors leapt in front of us. Without missing a beat and in leopard-like form, the huntress wrestled her prey into the shopping cart. Ernest Hemingway would have been proud. She also scored a set of matching 650 thread count sheets and duvet clips that keep the comforter from bunching up inside the duvet. The hunt was a success. I was exhausted and would sleep well, content with the thoughts that we captured our own duvet. And the best part, I had no nightmares about rogue pillows. So that's my story of duvet shopping. I'm sure we've all been there before. And that's just skimming the surface of the book, which will be available afterwards. But there must be some questions. Somebody must have something that I didn't answer. Yes?
Okay, in the world of DJs, when I was a kid, I remember there would be DJs in the rock stations, and their voices would change every so many months or years, but it was the same name for the DJ.
That's a very good question.
And how many were they? What's behind that?
All right, here's the story. Now, this doesn't happen too much anymore. This is kind of a 60s, 70s thing. When you worked for a certain type of top 40 radio station that was run by one particular company, they would have a set of names that they would send to WRKO was an example in Boston. When it was music 680, like when Dale Dorman was there, and some of the other names that you may recall. But what they did is they would hire jingle companies to sing people's names. You know, Bill Roberts, WRKO. So, Bill Roberts is really John Krzyzlowski. That's a tough one to say. Would get his own jingle, and then he would leave, and there'd be a new guy come in, and they might hold it for years so nobody would remember, and then all of a sudden a new guy with a new voice is John Roberts. And so they would only spend X amount of money to get jingles with your name on it, and so you had to, it was like the Brady Bunch outfit where they, the oldest kid was going to become a singer, Johnny Bravo, but he had to fit the suit, and he did, so he got to be Johnny Bravo. So it was one of those types of things. Nobody's ever asked, that's a great question. Who else has a great question? Even if it's not great, I don't care. Yes?
Did the Nashua Telegraph hire you after the tall ship incident?
They did. That happened about 4 years later. I don't even know if anybody there remembered, if the editor was even there. That's another job that turns over quickly, editors especially today. So I don't think so.
Who was your favorite DJ when you were young and not yet in business? Who
It's,
inspired you?
yes, it's nobody that anybody in this room has heard of unless you're from Detroit, which is where I grew up. I fell in love with radio in the 5th grade because the school I went to had buses, but then we moved further away, so I had to be driven to school. And on the way, the radio was on for 10 or 15 minutes, which I'd never heard. I'm 11 years old, and I'm hearing in the early 1960s, when radio was really wide open, these people having a great time and having fun. So the particular person who I first heard and who I really appreciated, his name was Fred Wolf, again, a name that you won't really know. Since I didn't grow up here, I can't really share a name. I was a fully formed personality by the time I moved to this area, but it was one person in the 5th grade because we moved and had to be driven to school. And if that hadn't happened, I don't know, but I knew from that moment, 5th grade, this is what I would do. And I'm one of the few people I know that actually got to do exactly what he wanted through his entire working career based on that. So, I mean, I moved around a lot. Grew up in Detroit, went to Toledo, then to Washington, New York, Boston, and now New Hampshire. So my family's back in Michigan. I don't get to see them as much, that's the downside. But, you know, with Facebook and everything now, we're all a lot closer together, so.
Did you ever meet Cousin Brucey?
Never met Cousin Brucey from WABC in New York. No, there were some really great names, you know, Wolfman Jack, and, you know, just tons of big name celebrities. Yes?
At one time, automobiles just had a radio.
Yes.
When they started having tape recorders and then CD, did that cut down in your audience?
Right. That's a really good question. She asked if, you know, one time cars just had radios, right? And then probably in the 60s or 70s, you had cassette recorders, and then eventually you had CD players.
Don't forget the 8-track.
And 8-tracks, yes.
And then you got the talking books.
Yeah. And talking books, right.
And I used to listen to talking books all the time.
It really didn't cut down on listenership all that much because people still needed to go somewhere to get the traffic, to get the weather, to get companionship. However, today, radio is being killed by the internet and by a million other things. Satellite radio, Sirius XM, is a subscription service that for the most part you can't get any local content, but a lot of people want to drive across the country and listen to, you know, 80s, and there's a channel for every format that you can imagine. So that was a great question. However, it's really bad now. Radio is having to struggle, which is why radio tries to be as local as it can, because that's really all we got. We have to talk about the people in our community and what's going on and the events. Then people will continue to listen because they've got a lot more choices now. And they still have books on tape, and they still have everything else, other choices. So it's very difficult to have your voice be heard through all the competition and all the clutter these days. It really is tougher than ever. Tougher than when I started in 1971. So,
Very good.
who else needs to know something? Yeah.
Was your desire to be on the radio also coupled with a love of music, or was that totally incidental or not even a factor?
People ask that a lot. It was really totally incidental. I wanted to tell stories, I wanted to talk, I wanted to interview people. So, and if there happened to be music, great. If it would have been, you know, jackhammers or whatever, fine. So, and I think that my post-radio career will be spent more getting stories, putting them in books. I have the cover story this month in the New Hampshire magazine. It's all about the Deerfield Fair. If you saw it or if you read it, I wrote that story. And it gave me a chance to interview people who just are average folks who have won ribbons and have done really good things at the fair, encouraging other people to do the same. And I find that longer form storytelling now is more interesting to me, because on the radio you have to bang, 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 get it out. You got to play a commercial, got to go to the newscast, you got to do this and that. So I can now tell a story, massage it a little bit, give the characters a little more development, make it a little bit more interesting than just 15 seconds. I mean, believe me, there's a skill and a talent in telling a story in 15 seconds, but this is much more enjoyable. Real faces, real stories, feedback, reaction. So I think this is where I'm going in the future. There'll be some radio, but there'll be more of this, I think. Yes?
I remember as a kid listening to DJs like Alan Freed and others, and as a kid pretending I was the DJ. Did you do that?
Show us how you did it. I sure did. I absolutely did. Once I knew in the 5th grade, you know, my parents bought this little radio mixing, it looked like a mixing board, I'm not even sure what it was, and I had a couple of record players with 45s, and I would be in my room pretending. Absolutely. I mean, what kid doesn't sort of pretend what they want to do to some degree when they're little? So yeah, you're right. I did do that.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever even attempt sports?
Did I attempt sports? Well, the answer to that is yes. For 8 years, I co-hosted a Candlepin Stars and Strikes on WNDS TV, working alongside this young man, Aaron Hatton, who was and still works at now WBIN in Derry, and we have some great memories. And so, yeah, I was always a bowling fan as a kid. In fact, I told you about Fred Wolf, the first guy that I heard that inspired me as a kid. He also was the play-by-play man for a national 10-pin bowling show at the time. So I got to watch this guy, and then I got to hear him on the radio. So I got hooked on bowling, and I got hooked on radio, and to this day, I still love them both. So, yeah.
Where did you get your training to be a DJ?
My training, I went to the University of Detroit and got a degree in communication studies. But you know what's really sad about that? Is only once in 43 years at an interview was I asked if I had a college degree. Imagine that, only once did anybody ever ask me. So for much of the media world, it's how you're able to perform. That's, to them, more important than having a college degree. But I still suggest that young people get degrees because it'll make you more interested, more interesting, well-rounded person. And the way the world's going today, I mean, radio as we know it is really changing quickly. I mean, I was one of just a handful of people still doing the same thing after 43 years. There are not many because they've been cut by satellite shows, by syndicated shows. I mean, Dr. Laura, Rush Limbaugh, there are thousands of stations. Well, that's thousands of people that don't have jobs anymore because the satellite propagation of these shows. So it was time to leave on a high note, which is what I did in June. Yes?
How do your family members react to the throngs of women that come up to you to say, I wake up with you in bed?
Usually a punch to the gut, but well, you have to be with somebody who understands that's part of the job. You know, you're a public figure, and generally it's not a problem. I mean, I can sometimes feel Barb's claws come out a little bit, but she understands, and I guess in my couple of relationships, they pretty much understood. You know, that's just the way it is. I mean, look at a guy like Scott Brown, you know, he probably gets hit on all the time, you know, in places. So, not that I'm Scott Brown, but I've shared stories. The original cougar sent me a picture of herself.
Is it weird to hear yourself on the radio?
It's not weird. I'm not sure how to explain it, but in my first radio job in northern Michigan, they had an automation system. So I would have a show that was on from 5 until 6 every weeknight. And when I would go in on the weekend, I would record a whole week's worth of talk. You know, just little incidental comments, not very long. So that on Friday, when I'd be driving back up to go in for the weekend, I'd be able to hear myself. And that was kind of cool, especially early on. But it's just, I'm just so used to it. I always forget who I am, and then I'm out in public and somebody says something, and I say, oh yeah, that's right, I'm that guy, aren't I? So, but I'm grateful. I had a pretty good run. I enjoyed my career. You know, nice people like you would listen and take enough time to come hear me talk tonight and hear some of the stories, some of which are not in the book. You got the director's cut. Yes?
One thing, remember the spoke you did about the tall ship coming up the waters?
Yes.
And you announced at the ESCO later that you'd be losing it, you'd be out for a day.
Yes.
It might have been neat if you said something about, that's all right because I've got a car wash job for that day.
You know what, I can't,
An interview.
no, you're right. You know what, I can't believe I didn't give you the ending of the punchline of the story, which is kind of like that. So I took whatever, I think it was a Thursday off, and you know, my so-called one-day suspension. So what I did is I drove to Foxwoods and made $200 playing blackjack. So it worked out okay. Yes, indeed. All right. If we had enough, we
What
probably.
have you done to protect your voice over the years? To keep
Ah.
yourself on the air, to keep yourself healthy?
Well, I have had 2 throat surgeries.
Oh.
I have. I had hemorrhagic polyps, probably from overuse, something very common with singers, teachers, get that a lot, factory workers, people that are always finding themselves having to talk or strain their voice. Part of it is if you don't have what's called good oral hygiene, enough hydration. You shouldn't eat a meal 3 hours before bedtime because you're lying down and you get GERD, acid reflux. So these are all things, and I'm very, very lucky. When I started having issues with my voice about 1999, I didn't know what was going on. I was always having to clear my throat. I couldn't record a commercial without stopping and editing, the good takes together. So I went to a doctor in Boston, who I was referred to at the Mass Eye and Ear. His name is Dr. Alan Zeitels. And if you've heard about people like Steven Tyler and Adele and Julie Andrews and Steven Tyler, they've all gone to him too. So I was really lucky. I was sent to the guy that people with throat issues, performers, go to. When I was up there in the waiting room, I heard people like singing opera down the hallway, just coming back. And I had to be silent for 3 weeks after, they slice and dice your vocal cords. You can't, because if you ever see your vocal cords, because I'll put an endoscope down your throat, and I suspect that's what was going on with Joan Rivers when she unfortunately had her cardiac arrest. But your vocal cords slam violently together. I mean, they really smack. And when you're singing, they really go crazy because of the vibrations just go nuts. So if you constantly go beyond what the body intends it to be, you will eventually get an injury. And then what happens is you get a little blood around this little spot. I'm not really, I guess, like any other kind of bleed on your body. And so the vocal cords don't fit together anymore. They normally fit together perfectly, but when there's a little bump in there somewhere, they don't go back. And so that's why your voice sounds scratchy and you can't talk very well. So had the surgery done, great, everything was awesome. I thought I sounded better than I ever did by this doctor. 6 years later, I did it again. Oh, and I know when I did it too. The first time I had no idea. The second time I was hosting an event at the Mall of New Hampshire. It was a Christmas event. It was a loud night. The PA system wasn't very strong, which is one of the reasons I always use a microphone even for a small crowd, because I don't want to have to really force. And I had laryngitis that night, so I was even projecting more than I should have. So within a few days, I said, oh, I know what's wrong. So I went to the doctor right away, sent me to Boston. By now, this is 6 years later, the guy doesn't take managed care. I had to come with a check for $5,000 just to get looked at to get the surgery. But he fixed it again. I learned my lesson. That was 8 years ago, and I'm really, really being as careful as I can. Because I had to get, when you're out of work for a couple of disability. Because, it was a legitimate, work-related situation. So, I should talk about that more because people need to take care of their voices because it can happen to anybody. Yes?
When you apply for a job to be a radio announcer, do you have to take a sound test? Because there's a lot of people who would probably like to be an announcer, but doesn't have a snowball's chance.
Yes. A lot of people would like to be announcers, and then I tell them how much they make, and they go, I don't want to be an announcer. Yeah. Sure. Do you take a sound test? Well, in a way you do. You submit something called an audition tape or audition sample. It's not tape anymore. We haven't used tape for 15 years. So you do an audition sample, which you might record a show, and then you cut all the music out. So what the program director, the manager, hears is about 4 minutes of you just talking. and they can kind of tell. And sometimes, I applied for a job at the first all-comedy station in this country, WJOK, WJOK in Washington, D.C., and they received 350 audition cassettes at the time. It was 1983, and they selected 5 people, so that was pretty good. I was pretty lucky to get that job. That was probably the biggest break in my career, because the first all-comedy station got a ton of publicity. The day we signed on, CNN was there, Wall Street Journal was there doing a story, and of course, I get your name out there in the broadcast community, and a lot of people knew who I was after that. People that are in a position to hire. Yes?
I imagine you've done thousands of remotes, and I'm sure some of them are a lot of fun, state fairs and stuff like that.
Yes.
Some of them are going to be pure day-long hell, which is
Yes.
nothing happens. You got to have
Yeah.
something about that.
The worst? Anybody want to guess what kind of business is the worst for doing remote broadcasts?
Blood drive.
No. Because at least you have happy people around there. You said cars.
Used cars.
Car dealerships are the worst, because nobody comes in. Who's going to show up at a car dealership just to see a DJ? I mean, that happened back in the 50s and 60s when there was about 8 DJs. Well, now there's a lot more, although it is going back toward 8. And so I always hated those because I felt I could never win. You know, it was going to reflect on me. They're going to use that as an excuse. Oh, we didn't get our money's worth for paying for this. But I'll tell you a story about a remote that, it was a WZID remote, about 1993. It was before I got there. And it was at the, it was a High Hopes Festival. It was for a fundraiser for children with incurable illnesses, Make-A-Wish Foundation. It was at the big hot air balloon festival, and it was somewhere, I don't know, maybe up in Lake Sunapee or whatever. So this guy, my friend Keith, is on the air, and all of a sudden this guy, and he's live on the air, a guy walks up to him and just kind of puts his arm around him while Keith is talking, and then Keith looks over and he goes, "Whoa,